There are 3 absolute rules in the Silvermont Pack, taught to every child before they learn to shift. Rule 1. Never challenge the Alpha's authority. Rule 2. Never cross into rival pack territory without permission. Rule 3. Never enter the North Tower. The first 2 rules make sense. They're about hierarchy and safety, the practical boundaries that keep a pack functioning without constant conflict. Everyone understands them. Most people follow them without question. The third rule is different. No one can explain why the North Tower is forbidden. The official explanation changes depending on who you ask. Some say it's structurally unsound, that the stairs are dangerous, the walls weakened by age, the entire structure one strong wind away from collapse. Others claim it's contaminated with something toxic, residue from experiments the pack's early healers conducted before they understood what they were doing. A few whisper darker stories about curses, about spirits sealed inside, about pack members who entered decades ago and were never seen again. The only consistent element across every explanation is this: do not go inside. Ever. For any reason. Lula Hicks has lived in the Silvermont Pack for 23 years and has heard every version of the story. She's an Omega, bottom rank, assigned to cleaning duties in the palace that houses the Pack's leadership council. She scrubs floors that betas walk across without seeing her. She launders sheets for wolves who never learn her name. She empties chamber pots and polishes silver, and does all the invisible work that keeps the palace functioning. She's also cleaned every accessible hallway in the palace dozens of times, including the one adjacent to the North Tower. The door is massive, ancient oak bound with iron, sealed with locks that look like they haven't been opened in generations. There's a symbol carved above the frame, 3 interlocking circles, their meaning lost to time. No dust collects on the threshold because no one walks close enough to disturb it. Lula cleans that hallway every Thursday. She's done it for 3 years without incident, until the night she hears the voice. It's late, past midnight, the palace settled into the quiet that comes when even the highest-ranking wolves are asleep. Lula is finishing the last section of hallway, her mop moving in practiced patterns across stone that's been worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. That's when she hears it. Is someone there? The voice is faint, barely audible, coming from behind the sealed North Tower door. Lula freezes mid-movement. Her first thought is that she imagined it, exhaustion playing tricks, her mind manufacturing sound in the oppressive silence. Then it comes again. Please, if you can hear me. I've been waiting so long. It's a man's voice. Hoarse. Desperate. Unquestionably real. Lula drops her mop. Her hands are shaking. Every instinct screams at her to run, to report this to someone with authority, to do anything except investigate the Forbidden Tower, where something impossible is happening. But there's something in that voice, something that bypasses her fear and speaks directly to the part of her that understands what it means to be invisible, to call for help and have no one answer. She approaches the door, places her hand against the ancient wood. "Hello," she calls softly. The response is immediate. "You can hear me." Oh gods, you can actually hear me. Who are you?
Lulas.
How are you in there? My name is Carlos, the voice says. I've been sealed in this tower for 25 years. And you're the first person who's answered me in all that time. Lula's mind races. 25 years. That's longer than she's been alive. If someone has been imprisoned in the North Tower for that long, it means... Are you the reason the tower is forbidden? She asks. I am the reason, Carlos confirms. They sealed me here and told the pack I was dead. They've been lying for a quarter century. Who sealed you? The beta who betrayed me. Vincent Kane. The man who's been ruling this pack while the rightful Alpha King rotted in a tomb. The world tilts. Everyone knows Vincent Kane. He's the pack Alpha, has been for as long as Lula can remember. The story of how he came to power is taught to every new member. The previous Alpha King, Carlos Gould, died heroically defending the territory from a rival pack incursion. Vincent assumed leadership during the crisis, and has ruled ever since. If the man behind this door is telling the truth, then everything Lula knows about her pack's history is a lie. I need to see you, Lula says. To verify. The door is sealed with silver locks, Carlos says. They were designed to suppress my strength. I can't break them from inside. You'll need a key. Where would I find a key? The palace archives. 3rd floor. There's a locked cabinet where they store historical documents. The keyring should be inside. They wouldn't have destroyed it because destroying evidence leaves questions. Hiding it in plain sight as historical artifact was safer. Lula shouldn't trust this. Shouldn't believe a voice coming from a forbidden tower, making extraordinary claims about conspiracy and betrayal. But something in her chest is pulling toward that door with a force she can't explain. A certainty that has no logical foundation but feels more real than anything she's ever experienced. She goes to the archives. The 3rd floor is restricted to scholars and council members, but at this hour it's empty. Lula picks the lock with a tension wrench she's carried since childhood, a skill learned from necessity when you're an Omega with no authority and many doors that need opening. The cabinet is exactly where Carlos described. The key ring is inside, covered in dust, labeled in faded ink. North Tower, Historical Lock Collection. Lula takes it. Her hands are still shaking. She returns to the forbidden door. Tries 7 keys before finding the one that fits. The lock clicks open with a sound like bones settling. The door swings inward on hinges that scream from disuse. Beyond it, a spiral staircase winds upward into darkness.
Lula cleaves.
At the top, another door. Another lock. Another key from the ring. This door opens into a circular chamber lit by a single narrow window. Moonlight streams through, illuminating what's inside. A man chained to a stone altar in the center of the room. He's skeletal. 25 years of minimal nutrition has consumed every spare ounce of flesh. His hair is long, matted, streaked with gray despite the face underneath appearing younger than the years suggest. Silver chains bind his wrists and ankles, glowing faintly with the supernatural suppressant that keeps Leakin's strength contained. But his eyes are burning.
Alive.
Focused on Lula with an intensity that makes her feel like she's standing in direct sunlight. You came, he says, and his voice is the same one she heard through the door, hoarse, desperate, but underlaid with something that sounds like relief. Or vindication. Or hope. After 25 years, someone finally came. Lula stares at him. At the man who shouldn't exist. At the Alpha King everyone believes is dead. Why didn't you die? She asks. The question sounds absurd the moment it leaves her mouth, but it's the only thing her brain can formulate. Carlos's laugh is bitter. I tried. The first year, I tried. But the silver keeps me weak enough that I can't shift, can't access the strength that would let me break these chains or end my own life. I've been trapped in the space between living and dying for 25 years.
Why?
Lula's voice cracks. Why would Vincent do this? Because I refused to sanction his plan, Carlos says. He wanted to expand our territory through aggressive conquest. Take land from weaker packs. I said no. So he poisoned me with silver, overpowered me while I was weak, sealed me here, and told the pack I died in battle. Clean transfer of power. No questions asked. He shifts against the chains, and Lula sees how they've worn grooves into his wrists over the years.
Permanent damage.
25 years of slow torture. I called out every day for the first 5 years, Carlos continues. Screamed until my voice gave out. Begged anyone who might be near the tower to investigate. No one came. Eventually, I stopped believing anyone would. Then why keep calling?
Lula asks.
Carlos meets her eyes. Because giving up would mean Vincent won completely. And I couldn't let that happen. Lula looks at the chains. At the locks holding them closed. At the man who's been buried alive for a quarter century in a tower less than 100 yards from where his betrayer rules. I can free you, she says.
You can't, Carlos says.
The locks require a specific combination. Vincent is the only one who knows it. Then I'll find another way.
Why?
Carlos asks, and the question is genuine. You don't know me. You owe me nothing. Freeing me would put you in extraordinary danger. Vincent will kill you if he discovers you know I'm alive.
Lula thinks about this.
About the rational calculation that says she should lock this door, return the key, forget everything she heard and saw tonight. But 25 years is a long time to wait for rescue. And Lula knows what it feels like to call for help and hear nothing but silence in response. Because someone should have come sooner, Lula says. And I can't undo 25 years. But I can end it now. Carlos stares at her. Something shifts in his expression. The first crack in the wall of resignation he's built around himself over decades of captivity. What's your name? He asks.
Lula. Lula Hickes.
Lula, Carlos repeats, like he's testing the weight of it. You have no idea what you're walking into. I know enough, Lula says. You're the rightful Alpha King. Vincent is a usurper. The pack deserves to know the truth. The pack has lived with Vincent's lie for 25 years, Carlos says. They've built their lives around it. Revealing the truth will destroy everything they believe about their own history. Good, Lula says. If their history is a lie, it deserves to be destroyed. She doesn't know where the certainty is coming from. She's never been bold, never been brave. She's an Omega who's spent her entire life making herself invisible to avoid attention. But standing in this tomb, looking at this man who refused to surrender even when every rational option pointed toward giving up, Lula feels something shift inside her chest. If she walks away now, she becomes complicit in the lie. She becomes part of the system that buried Carlos alive and called it justice. And she won't do that. I'll find the combination, Lula says. Or I'll find another way to break these chains. But I'm not leaving you here. Carlos looks at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiles, a broken, painful expression that looks like it costs him everything. Then we're going to war, he says. You and me. The buried king and the Omega who found him. I've never been to war, Lula admits. Neither have I, Carlos says. Not like this. But Lula, if you do this, if you actually free me, there's no going back. Vincent will come for you. The pack will resist. Everything you know will change. Everything I know is already changing, Lula says. And as she stands in the Forbidden Tower, looking at the Alpha King who's been waiting 25 years for someone to hear him, Lula understands that her life divided into before and after the moment she opened this door. Before, invisible, powerless, defined by boundaries she never chose. After, something she can't even name yet, but something that feels like purpose. What happens when an Omega defies the pack's most absolute prohibition and opens the sealed North Tower? Why was Alpha King Carlos Gould imprisoned for 25 years instead of killed? How did Vincent Kane convince an entire pack that their king died heroically when he's actually chained in a tomb 100 yards from the throne room? And why does Carlos say you came to Lula like he was waiting specifically for her? If you want to know how Lula plans to free a man bound by silver chains designed by his betrayer, what happens when Vincent discovers someone knows his secret, whether the Silvermont pack will believe they're real Alpha King after 25 years of lies, and what unpredictable twist is waiting at the heart of this conspiracy, subscribe now. Because this isn't just about freeing a prisoner. This is about what happens when the lowest-ranked wolf in the pack becomes the only thing standing between a buried king and the usurper who's ruled in his place for a generation. Hit subscribe if you want to see forbidden doors opened, ancient conspiracies exposed, and the most satisfying war between truth and comfortable lies you've ever witnessed. Lula doesn't sleep that night. She returns to her quarters in the Omega Wing, a small room she shares with 2 other cleaning staff, and lies on her narrow bed staring at the ceiling while her mind races through everything she heard, everything she saw, everything that's now irrevocably changed. Carlos Gould is alive. The Alpha King, who supposedly died 25 years ago, has been sealed in the North Tower, chained with silver, kept weak enough that he can't escape, but strong enough that he can't die. Vincent Kane, the Pack's alpha for Lula's entire life, is a usurper. A betrayer who murdered his king's reputation, if not his body, and has ruled through deception for a quarter-century. And Lula is the only person who knows. The weight of that knowledge is crushing. Because knowing creates obligation. She can't unknow what she discovered. Can't close the door and pretend the North Tower is just a forbidden space with unclear dangers. She has to do something. But what? She's an Omega. Bottom rank. She has no authority, no connections, no resources beyond her cleaning supplies and the small wage she earns scrubbing floors. How is she supposed to free an Alpha King from chains designed by his betrayer? The next morning, Lula goes through her duties mechanically. She cleans the same hallways, launders the same sheets, empties the same chamber pots. But her mind is elsewhere, calculating, planning, trying to find an angle that doesn't end with her being executed for treason. She needs more information. About the chains. About Vincent's security. About whether there's anyone in the Pack who might help if they knew the truth. That afternoon, she returned to the palace archives. The records are extensive, centuries of Pack history documented in meticulous detail. Lula searches for anything related to silver restraints, to the North Tower's construction, to Carlos Gould's supposed death. What she finds is illuminating. The official account of Carlos's death is sparse. Barely a paragraph describing a territorial conflict with the Nightshade Pack that resulted in tragic losses, including Alpha King Carlos Gould. No details about the battle. No witnesses named. No body recovered because it was supposedly too damaged by the conflict. It's the kind of story that invites questions if anyone bothers to ask them. But 25 years is a long time. The wolves who might have questioned the account are either dead or so invested in the current order that challenging it would destroy their own positions.
Lula quer psearchem.
And eventually finds something unexpected. A journal. Personal writings from Beta Vincent Kane during the year before Carlos's death. The entries are damning. Carlos refuses to see reason. The Nightshade Pack controls territory that rightfully belongs to Silvermont. Taking it would strengthen our position, expand our resources. But he's fixated on honor and avoiding unnecessary conflict.
He's weak.
The Pack deserves stronger leadership. I've approached the council discreetly. Several members agree that Carlos's pacifism is endangering the Pack. They would support a change in leadership if it came to that. The Silver Compound is ready. Healer Devon assures me it will suppress Leakin's strength for approximately 6 hours, long enough to secure him. The North Tower has been prepared. Once he's sealed, we'll announce his death. The Pack will mourn. And then we'll move forward under proper leadership. The journal ends the day before Carlos's supposed death. Lula photographs every page with shaking hands. This is evidence. Proof of conspiracy. Documentation that Vincent planned and executed the betrayal. But it's also 25 years old. Hidden in archives that no one except historians access. Vincent must have forgotten it existed, or believed no one would ever connect the dots.
He was almost right.
Lula returns to the North Tower that night. Carlos is exactly where she left him, chained, skeletal, watching the door like he knew she'd come back. "You came again," he says, and there's surprise in his voice. "I told you I would," Lula says. She produces the photographs of Vincent's journal. "I found evidence. Documentation of the conspiracy. Vincent wrote about planning your imprisonment." Carlos reads through the images, his expression shifting from surprise to something harder.
He documented it.
The arrogant fool actually documented his own treason. This could help, Lula says. Proof that. It's not enough, Carlos interrupts gently. Not on its own. The journal proves Vincent planned something, but it doesn't prove I'm alive. He could claim these were contingency plans he never executed. Could say I actually did die in the battle, and this was just theoretical preparation. Then what do we need? We need to break these chains, Carlos says. We need me free, standing before the pack, undeniably alive. Only then does the journal become irrefutable proof of betrayal rather than theoretical planning. Lula looks at the silver restraints. You said the locks require a combination only Vincent knows.
Yes.
But there might be another way. Carlos shifts and Lula sees how even that small movement costs him. The chains are suppressing my leaken strength, but they're doing it chemically through the silver compound. If we could neutralize that compound, temporarily override its effects, I might be strong enough to break the chains during the window before it reasserts. How do we neutralize it? I don't know, Carlos admits. That's knowledge the healers would have. Specifically healer Devon, who created the compound for Vincent. Then I'll talk to Devon, Lula says. He won't help you, Carlos says flatly. He's Vincent's creature. Has been from the beginning. Then I'll find another healer. Lula, Carlos says, and the way he says her name makes her pause. You understand what you're risking? If Vincent discovers you know I'm alive, if anyone reports that an Omega is asking questions about silver suppressants and the North Tower, he'll have you killed. Quietly. Efficiently. And no one will question it, because you're just an Omega. I know, Lula says. But someone has to take the risk. And it might as well be someone Vincent doesn't consider important enough to monitor. She sees Carlos process this, the strategic logic of being underestimated, of invisibility as advantage rather than limitation. You're remarkable, he says quietly.
I'm practical, Lula corrects.
And I'm running out of time. Every day you're in here is another day, Vincent's lie continues. I won't let that stand. She doesn't know where this certainty comes from. She should be terrified. Should be paralyzed by the magnitude of what she's attempting. But looking at Carlos, at 25 years of suffering that should have broken anyone, Lula feels something that's stronger than fear. Purpose. For the first time in her life, she has a purpose that's hers. Not assigned by her rank. Not dictated by the hierarchy. Just hers. I'll find a way to break the chains, Lula promises. However long it takes. Carlos looks at her with an expression that's complex, gratitude, disbelief, and something else. Something that looks almost like recognition. Why are you doing this? He asks. Really? Lula thinks about it honestly. Because you've been calling for help for 25 years, and no one came. Because Vincent's betrayal is still happening every day he rules while you're in here. And because someone has to do the right thing even when it's dangerous. She pauses. Also because the system that sealed you in this tower is the same system that told me I'm worthless, because I'm an Omega. I'm tired of that system winning. Carlos stares at her. Then, incredibly, he laughs, a sound that's rusty from disuse but genuine. You're not just freeing me, he says. You're declaring war on the entire hierarchy. Good, Lula says. It deserves it. And standing in the tomb where an Alpha King has been buried for a generation, Lula makes a decision that will change both their lives forever. She's not just going to free Carlos Gould. She's going to help him take back his throne. And nothing, not Vincent's power, not the pack's comfortable lies, not her own Omega rank, is going to stop her. Lula spends the next week researching silver suppressants in every accessible resource she can find. Medical texts in the palace library. Healer journals in the archives. Even old pack histories that mention silver being used as a restraint against rogue lichens. What she learns is both promising and terrifying. Silver works by interfering with the lichen's ability to access their wolf form. It essentially blocks the neurological pathways that trigger the shift. But it's not permanent. The body metabolizes the compound over time. The chains holding Carlos must be designed to continuously reintroduce the suppressant, keeping him in a perpetual state of weakness. If the reintroduction mechanism could be disrupted, even temporarily, Carlos might regain enough strength to break free. The problem is identifying that mechanism without alerting anyone to what she's doing. Lula needs help. Someone with medical knowledge who isn't loyal to Vincent. Someone she can trust with a secret that could get them both killed. She thinks of healer Rachel Monroe. Rachel is young, barely 30, and relatively new to the palace medical staff. She came from a smaller pack 2 years ago through a transfer agreement, which means her loyalty to Vincent isn't generational or deeply rooted. More importantly, Lula has seen Rachel treat Omega patients with actual care rather than the dismissive efficiency most healers show toward low-ranking wolves. It's not much to base trust on, but it's all Lula has. She approaches Rachel during the healer's evening clinic hours, when the palace is quiet and conversations are less likely to be overheard. "Healer Monroe," Lula says quietly, "I need to ask you something. Privately." Rachel looks up from her notes, surprised. Omegas don't usually seek private conversations with healers. "Is this about a medical issue?" "In a way," Lula says. "But it's complicated. Can we speak somewhere that's not public?" Rachel's expression shifts, curiosity mixed with wariness. But she stands and gestures to a small examination room. "In here. Close the door." Once they're alone, Lula takes a breath. This is the moment of commitment. Once she speaks, there's no taking it back. "If I told you the Alpha King everyone thinks died 25 years ago is actually alive, would you believe me?" Rachel goes very still. "What kind of question is that?" "A serious one," Lula says. "And I need an answer before I say anything else." Rachel studies her for a long moment. "I'd say that's an extraordinary claim that would require extraordinary evidence. I'd also say that making such a claim is extremely dangerous for both of us if you're wrong. Or if you're right." "I'm right," Lula says. "I've seen him. Spoken to him. He's in the North Tower. Chained with silver restraints that have kept him weak for 25 years. The North Tower is forbidden," Rachel says carefully. "No one's supposed to enter." "I entered," Lula interrupts. 3 nights ago. I heard a voice. I found the key. And I discovered that every story we've been told about Alpha King Carlos Gould's death is a lie manufactured by Beta Vincent Kane." She produces the photographs of Vincent's journal. This is documentation. Vincent's own words describing how he planned to imprison Carlos using a silver compound that would suppress Leakin's strength. Rachel reads through the images, her face growing progressively paler. This can't be real. If this is real, then Vincent has been ruling under false pretenses for 25 years, Lula finishes. And Carlos Gould has been calling for help from a tomb 100 yards from the throne room while everyone walked past and heard nothing. "Why are you telling me this?" Rachel asks, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I need help," Lula says. "The chains holding Carlos use a silver compound to continuously suppress his strength. If I can disrupt that mechanism, temporarily neutralize the compound, he might be strong enough to break free. But I don't have the medical knowledge to do it safely." "You want me to help you free a prisoner who might be the rightful Alpha King," Rachel says slowly. "Based on photographs of a journal and your word that you found him in a forbidden tower." "Yes," Lula says simply. Rachel is quiet for a long time. "Then, if you're lying, or if this is some kind of test of loyalty, we're both dead." "I know. If you're telling the truth and we succeed, Vincent will try to kill us anyway." "I know that too." Rachel looks at the photographs again. At Vincent's handwriting documenting conspiracy and betrayal. Evidence that's been hidden in plain sight for a quarter century. "I'll need to see him," Rachel says finally. "I can't help based on photographs alone. If Carlos Gould is actually alive in that tower, I need to examine him. Verify his identity. Assess his condition." "I can arrange that," Lula says, relief flooding through her.
Tonight.
After the palace settles. That night, Lula brings Rachel to the North Tower. Carlos is awake. He always seems to be awake, as though sleep is a luxury he can't afford. When Lula enters with another person, his expression shifts from surprise to wariness. "This is healer Rachel Monroe," Lula says. "I trust her. She's here to help." "You trust easily," Carlos observes. "I trust carefully," Lula corrects. Rachel transferred here from another pack. She's not part of Vincent's generational power structure. And she treats Omegas like people instead of problems. That's enough for me. Rachel approaches Carlos slowly, her healer's training overriding her shock at seeing a living man where a dead king should be. I need to examine you, verify your identity, and assess the restraint system. Verify however you need to, Carlos says. But be aware, the chains don't allow much movement. Rachel works methodically, checking Carlos's vitals, examining the silver restraints, running tests that Lula doesn't understand, but that seem to satisfy the healer's need for concrete data. Finally, Rachel steps back. You're Carlos Gould. The bone structure matches historical portraits. The Leakin energy signature, though suppressed, is consistent with alpha bloodlines. And the medical effects of 25 years of continuous silver exposure are... She trails off, looking disturbed. You should have died. Multiple times. The fact that you're still conscious, still coherent, is medically improbable. I'm stubborn, Carlos says dryly. You're extraordinary, Rachel corrects. She turns to Lula. He's telling the truth. This is the Alpha King, which means Vincent Kane is a usurper and our entire pack has been living a lie. Can you break the chains?
Lula asks.
Rachel examines the restraints more closely. The silver compound is delivered through these small chambers built into the chains. They release measured doses that keep his system saturated. If I could neutralize what's already in his bloodstream and then temporarily seal these chambers, there might be a window, maybe 10 minutes, where he'd have enough strength to break free. What do you need?
Lula asks.
A neutralizing agent, Rachel says. And access to my medical supplies without raising suspicion. I can create something that should work, but I'll need at least 48 hours. Take the time you need, Carlos says. I've waited 25 years. 48 hours is nothing. After Rachel leaves, Lula stays with Carlos. They've fallen into a pattern over the past few nights. Lula visiting after her duties are complete, bringing food she's stolen from the palace kitchens, sitting with Carlos while he eats and they talk. You didn't have to bring Rachel here, Carlos says. That was a risk. A calculated one, Lula says. We needed medical expertise. Rachel was the best option. Still, trusting someone with this secret. Carlos trails off. You're braver than you realize.
I'm terrified, Lula admits.
Every moment of every day. But fear doesn't change what needs to be done.
No, Carlos agrees.
It doesn't. He's quiet for a moment. Then, Lula, when I'm free, if we succeed, things are going to get very complicated very quickly. Vincent won't surrender peacefully. The pack will be divided between those who believe me and those who've invested too much in Vincent's regime to accept the truth. There will be violence. I know, Lula says. And you're still willing to help? Knowing what's coming. Lula thinks about it honestly. I've spent my entire life being told I don't matter. That my rank defines my worth. That invisible work by invisible people is all I'm capable of. Freeing you proves all of that wrong. So yes, I'm willing. Whatever comes after. Carlos looks at her with an expression that's complex. Gratitude, admiration, and something that looks almost like wonder. When this is over, when I'm free and we've dealt with Vincent, I want you to know something.
What?
You were meant to find me, Carlos says. I don't believe in fate or destiny or any of that mystical nonsense. But Lula, 25 years, thousands of days, hundreds of thousands of people walking past this tower. And you're the one who heard me, who investigated, who chose to help despite every rational reason not to. That's not fate, Lula says. That's just timing. Maybe, Carlos says. Or maybe it's something more. Either way, I'm grateful it was you. The words settle into the space between them. Not romantic, not yet, but carrying weight that suggests possibilities neither of them is ready to name. Rachel works for 48 hours straight, creating a compound that should neutralize the silver in Carlos's bloodstream long enough for him to break the chains. It's not perfect, Rachel warns when she brings the vial to the North Tower. I've tested it on silver-contaminated blood samples, and the results are promising. But Carlos's exposure is extreme. There are variables I can't predict. What's the worst that could happen?
Lula asks.
The compound could react badly with the accumulated silver. Could cause seizures, cardiac arrest, system-wide shutdown. Or it might simply not work at all, and we'll have shown our hand for nothing. What are the odds of success? Carlos asks. Honestly, I'd estimate 60%. Maybe 70% if we're lucky. Those are terrible odds, Lula says. They're the best odds we're going to get, Rachel counters. The longer Carlos stays in these chains, the more damage accumulates. Eventually, the silver exposure will cause irreversible harm. We're already past the point where most lichens would have died. If we're going to act, it needs to be now. Carlos and Lula exchange glances. A silent conversation passes between them. Risk versus certainty, action versus waiting, the calculation of what's worth gambling on. Do it, Carlos says. Rachel administers the compound through an injection site near Carlos's wrist. The effect is immediate and violent. Carlos convulses, his body arching against the chains as the neutralizing agent floods his system. Lula reaches for him instinctively, but Rachel holds her back. Don't touch him. The compound is reacting with the accumulated silver. His body is metabolizing decades of contamination all at once. It's going to look bad. Look bad is an understatement. Carlos is seizing, his muscles spasming uncontrollably, blood vessels standing out stark against pale skin. For a terrible moment, Lula thinks they've killed him, that the cure was worse than the imprisonment. Then something changes. The silver chains begin to crack. Tiny fractures appear along their length, stress points where Carlos's returning strength is testing the metal's integrity. His eyes snap open, no longer the sunken, resigned eyes of a prisoner but the burning, focused eyes of an alpha king. He pulls against the restraints. The fractures widen. Metal screams. And then, with a sound like thunder, the chains shatter. Carlos collapses forward, catching himself on hands that haven't supported his weight in 25 years. He's shaking from the compound's aftereffects, from sudden freedom, from the rush of power returning to a body that's been suppressed for a generation. It worked, Rachel breathes. It actually worked. Carlos pushes himself upright slowly. His body is still emaciated, still damaged from decades of imprisonment. But there's power in his movements now, the unmistakable presence of an alpha who's reclaiming strength that was stolen from him. How long until the silver reasserts? Carlos asks, his voice stronger than Lula's ever heard it. Unknown, Rachel says. The compound should have bought you several hours. Maybe more. But Carlos, your body has been weakened by 25 years of captivity. Even with the silver neutralized, you're not at full strength. I don't need full strength, Carlos says. I just need enough to get out of this tower and confront Vincent before the pack. We need a plan, Lula says. Storming the throne room isn't. She's interrupted by sounds from below. Footsteps on the spiral staircase. Multiple people. Moving fast. They know, Rachel says, her face going pale. Someone must have seen me bringing supplies. The door bursts open. 6 guards flood into the chamber, weapons drawn. Behind them, moving with the casual confidence of someone who owns the space, is Beta Vincent Kane. He looks at Carlos, alive, unchained, standing, and his expression doesn't show surprise. Just cold calculation. So, Vincent says, someone finally found you. I was wondering when that would happen. Wait. Lula just spent a week researching silver suppressants, recruited a healer, broke into the forbidden North Tower again to administer an experimental compound with 60 to 70% success odds to the Alpha King, who's been chained there for 25 years. The compound worked. The chain shattered. Carlos is free for the first time in a generation. And then Vincent, the beta who buried him alive and has been ruling in his place for 2.5 decades, shows up with 6 guards like he was expecting this. I was wondering when that would happen.
Sir.
You've been wondering? You knew someone might find him eventually, and you just waited? What kind of long-game chess is Vincent playing here? Meanwhile, Lula is standing there like, I'm an Omega with a mop who just accidentally started a civil war, and Rachel is probably regretting every life choice that led to this moment, and Carlos just broke free from silver chains through sheer spite and medical science. If you want to know why Vincent isn't surprised, what his plan actually was for when Carlos eventually got free, whether our heroes survive the next 5 minutes, and what unpredictable twist is about to make everything so much worse, subscribe now because we are about to go from Forbidden Tower mystery to pack-wide political crisis real fast. Vincent's guards move to surround Carlos, but Vincent raises a hand, stopping them. Stand down, Vincent orders. No violence. Yet. He steps into the chamber, assessing Carlos with the clinical interest of someone examining a specimen. 25 years. You look terrible, Carlos. I'd almost feel sorry for you if you hadn't made this necessary. You buried me alive, Carlos says, his voice low and dangerous. Told the pack I was dead. Ruled in my place for a quarter century. And you call that necessary? I call it pragmatic, Vincent says. You were weak, sentimental, unwilling to make the hard decisions required to strengthen this pack. Someone had to take control. Someone had to commit treason, you mean? Rachel interjects. Vincent's gaze slides to her. Healer Monroe.
I'm disappointed.
You seemed promising when you transferred here. Now you've thrown your career away for a dead king and a meddling Omega. He's not dead, Lula says, finding her voice despite the terror clawing at her throat. You failed. Whatever you planned, it failed because Carlos survived. Oh, I didn't fail, Vincent says, and his smile is cold. Quite the opposite. Everything has gone exactly as I expected. The words hang in the air like poison. What are you talking about? Carlos demands. Vincent gestures to the shattered chains, to Carlos standing free, to the entire scene before them. Did you really think I didn't know this would happen eventually? That someone would find you, free you, create exactly this dramatic confrontation? He pulls a small device from his pocket, a recording crystal, the kind used to document important pack events. I've been monitoring this tower for years. Magical surveillance triggered the moment those chains broke. I knew instantly that someone had freed you. I came here specifically to let you think you'd won. Why? Lula asks, though dread is already forming in her stomach. Because I needed witnesses, Vincent says. I needed it documented that Carlos Gould, who the pack believes died heroically 25 years ago, is actually alive. That he's been imprisoned in this tower all this time. That you, Lula, and you, Rachel, freed him in direct violation of pack law regarding forbidden spaces. He activates the recording crystal. Its glow indicates it's been running since the moment Vincent entered the chamber. Now I have everything I need, Vincent continues. Proof that the North Tower contained Carlos. Proof that he's been alive this whole time. Proof that 2 pack members, 1 Omega, 1 healer, conspired to free him without proper authority. You're going to spin this, Carlos realizes. Make it look like we're the criminals. I'm going to tell the truth, Vincent corrects.
A version of it, anyway.
Carlos Gould was imprisoned for crimes against the pack. His sentence was administered quietly to avoid political instability. You, Lula, discovered him and freed him, either out of misguided compassion or because you were manipulated by his lies. Either way, you broke fundamental pack law. What crimes? Rachel demands. What possible justification? Does it matter? Vincent asks. The pack has lived peacefully under my leadership for 25 years. They're comfortable, stable, prosperous. They won't want to believe their alpha is a usurper. They'll accept whatever explanation preserves that comfort. He looks at Carlos directly. You could tell them the truth. Show them my journal. Explain the betrayal. Some might even believe you. But most will choose the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. That's human nature. That's what I'm counting on. You son of a... Carlos starts forward, but Vincent's guards immediately raise their weapons. I wouldn't, Vincent says calmly. You're weak. Malnourished. 25 years of captivity has damaged your body in ways that can't be reversed quickly. My guards are fresh, well-trained, and loyal to me. If you fight now, you'll lose. And I'll have justification to execute you for attacking the pack alpha. The trap is perfect. Elegant. Utterly ruthless. Vincent planned for this. Not just the imprisonment, but the eventual discovery. The rescue. The confrontation. All of it designed to give him legal and political cover regardless of what Carlos does. What do you want? Lula asks, her mind racing through options and finding none that don't end in death. Simple, Vincent says. Carlos returns to the tower. Peacefully. Accepting his sentence. You and Rachel receive punishment for breaking pack law. Probably exile rather than execution, since I'm not actually cruel. And life continues as it has for 25 years. You're insane if you think I'll agree to that, Carlos says. Then I'll have you dragged back to the tower in chains, Vincent says. And Lula and Rachel will be executed as conspirators in your escape attempt. The pack will mourn the tragedy of two misguided wolves who fell victim to a criminal's manipulation. And I'll continue ruling. Your choice, Carlos. Return peacefully and save them, or fight and doom them. It's a perfect trap. And they all know it. Carlos looks at Lula, at Rachel, at the two people who risked everything to free him. Go, Lula says quietly. Don't let him execute us for helping you. I'm not going back in that tower, Carlos says flatly. Then we're all dead, Rachel says. Vincent watches this exchange with satisfaction. I'll give you 60 seconds to decide. After that, my guards act. The seconds tick by in suffocating silence. And then Carlos does something none of them expect. He smiles. You made one mistake, Vincent, Carlos says. What's that? You assumed I'd negotiate. Carlos's voice changes, deeper, resonating with Alpha Command that's been suppressed for 25 years, but is now surging back with devastating force. You assumed I'd accept your terms to save Lula and Rachel. You assumed I was still the pacifist you betrayed. His eyes begin to glow, the silver blue that marks alpha power asserting itself. I'm not, Carlos continues. 25 years in that tomb changed me. Taught me that mercy toward people like you isn't kindness, it's weakness. So no, Vincent. I'm not negotiating. I'm not returning to the tower. And I'm certainly not letting you execute the two people who freed me. Then you're sentencing them to death, Vincent says. No, Carlos says. I'm calling your bluff. He raises his voice, projecting it with alpha power that makes the stone walls vibrate. Silvermont Pack, your Alpha King calls you. Carlos Gould, imprisoned for 25 years by the usurper Vincent Kane, calls you to witness. The command ripples outward, a psychic summons that every wolf in the territory will feel in their bones. The kind of call that can't be ignored or dismissed. Vincent's expression shifts from satisfaction to alarm. You can't. I just did, Carlos says. In 5 minutes, hundreds of wolves will descend on this tower. They'll see you here. See me for free. See the shattered chains. And you'll have to explain to all of them, publicly, why their supposedly dead Alpha King is actually alive and imprisoned in a forbidden tower. They won't believe you, Vincent says, but uncertainty has crept into his voice. Maybe not, Carlos admits, but they'll hear me. And doubt, once planted, is very hard to uproot. You should know you've been cultivating it for 25 years. Footsteps thunder below. Wolves responding to the alpha call, drawn by compulsion they don't understand, but can't resist. Vincent looks at his guards. At the recording crystal. at the trap that's suddenly become more complicated than he planned. This isn't over, Vincent says.
No, Carlos agrees.
It's just beginning. Within minutes, the North Tower is surrounded. Hundreds of Silvermont Pack members flood the area, drawn by Carlos's alpha call. They don't know why they've been summoned. Don't understand the compulsion that pulled them from their homes, their work, their lives. They just know they're alpha called. And instinct demanded they answer. The problem? They think their alpha is Vincent. Lula watches from the tower window as confusion spreads through the crowd. Wolves milling, asking each other what's happening, why Beta Vincent is in the Forbidden Tower with guards, and
Wait.
who's that with him? Carlos stands at the tower entrance where everyone can see him. He's skeletal, damaged, clearly weakened by decades of imprisonment. But there's no mistaking the alpha power radiating from him, the presence that commands attention and respect regardless of physical condition. Silvermont Pack, Carlos says, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. My name is Carlos Gould. 25 years ago, I was your Alpha King. You were told I died in battle. That lie has been maintained by Vincent Kane since the day he betrayed me. The crowd erupts in shocked murmurs. Denial. Confusion. Some wolves looking to Vincent for explanation, others staring at Carlos like they're seeing a ghost. Vincent steps forward, his expression carefully controlled. This man is a criminal who is imprisoned for crimes against the pack. He's manipulated 2 pack members into freeing him. I have proof, Carlos interrupts. He nods to Lula, who produces the photographs of Vincent's journal. Documentation. Vincent's own words, written the year before my supposed death, describing exactly how he planned to imprison me using silver compound and claim the alpha position. Those could be forged, Vincent says quickly. Manufactured by someone seeking to destabilize pack leadership. Then explain the tower, Carlos challenges. Explain why I was sealed in a forbidden space for 25 years. Explain the silver chains designed specifically to suppress alpha strength. Explain why you're here right now, in a tower that's supposedly too dangerous to enter, with guards positioned as though you were expecting exactly this confrontation. The crowd is listening, really listening, and Lula can see doubt spreading, the kind of doubt that undermines comfortable certainty. The journal proves nothing on its own, Vincent argues. It proves I considered contingency plans 25 years ago. It doesn't prove Carlos Gould is who he claims to be. For all we know, this could be an imposter. A rogue Leakin trying to destabilize our pack by impersonating our dead king. It's a good counter.
Clever.
Appeals to the pack's desire to believe their comfortable reality rather than accept uncomfortable truth. But Carlos has been planning for this moment for 25 years. Test me, he says. Verify my identity, however you need to. Medical examination. Blood verification. Historical knowledge only the real Carlos Gould would possess. I'll submit to any test that proves who I am. And if you pass those tests, Vincent asks, if you prove you're Carlos Gould, that doesn't automatically make my imprisonment of you unjust. You could have committed crimes. What crimes? Carlos demands. Specifically, what did I do that justified secret imprisonment rather than public trial? Vincent hesitates. It's a brief pause, barely noticeable, but the crowd notices. You refused to protect the pack's interests, Vincent says. You prioritized false honor over territorial expansion that would have strengthened us. I refuse to sanction aggressive conquest, Carlos corrects. I refuse to start wars with neighboring packs for land we didn't need. That's not a crime, Vincent. That's leadership based on principle rather than greed. He addresses the crowd directly. 25 years ago, Vincent wanted to expand our territory through force. I said no. So he poisoned me with silver, overpowered me while I was weak, sealed me in this tower, and told all of you I died heroically. He's ruled ever since through a lie that's been comfortable because questioning it would require admitting you were deceived. The crowd is fracturing. Lula can see it, some wolves still loyal to Vincent, clinging to the familiar order. Others looking at Carlos with dawning recognition. Still others simply confused, unsure who to believe. An older wolf steps forward from the crowd. Lula recognizes him. Elder Timothy, one of the few pack members old enough to have clear memories of Carlos's rule. "I remember you," Timothy says quietly. "You were young when you became Alpha King. 26, maybe 27. You changed protocols for low-ranking wolves. Made it easier for Omegas to appeal grievances. Vincent reversed those changes the year after you supposedly died. Because they were inefficient," Vincent says quickly. "Because they threatened hierarchy," Carlos corrects. "Because treating Omegas with dignity complicated the comfortable order where power flows one direction only." He looks at Lula, still standing beside him despite every rational reason to run. "This woman, Lula Hicks, Omega, cleaning staff, is the reason I'm free. She heard me calling from this tomb. She investigated when everyone else walked past for 25 years. She risked her life to find the truth. And Vincent would have executed her for it. She broke fundamental pack law," Vincent argues. "The North Tower is forbidden for good reason. The North Tower is forbidden because you needed me buried where no one would find me," Carlos interrupts. "The entire prohibition exists to hide your crime. And Lula broke it because she has more integrity than this entire pack has shown in a generation." The words land hard. Lula sees wolves flinch, recognition that they've been complicit through inaction, through comfortable acceptance of what they were told. "I'm calling for a formal challenge," Carlos says. "Traditional alpha combat. Vincent Kane versus Carlos Gould. The winner takes leadership. The pack can witness and decide for themselves who they believe." It's a risk. Carlos is weak, damaged by 25 years of captivity. Vincent is in peak condition, has trained continuously, has every physical advantage. But it's also brilliant strategy. Because refusing the challenge would make Vincent look weak. And accepting it means Carlos gets his confrontation, regardless of whether the pack believes his story. Vincent knows he's trapped. "You can barely stand. Combat would be suicide." "Then it should be an easy victory for you," Carlos says. "Unless you're afraid I might win despite the disadvantages." The crowd is watching, waiting, the pressure building. Vincent's jaw tightens.
Fine.
"I accept. But we do this properly. Medical verification first. Prove you're actually Carlos Gould and not an imposter. Then 3 days to prepare. Then combat witnessed by the entire pack." "Agreed," Carlos says. And just like that, the confrontation shifts from immediate violence to structured challenge. It's not the ending Vincent wanted. He's lost control of the narrative, been forced into public combat he wanted to avoid. But it's not the ending Carlos hoped for either. 3 days to recover from 25 years of damage. 3 days for Vincent to plan, to strategize, to find angles that turn Carlos's weakened condition into decisive advantage. 3 days for everything to go catastrophically wrong. The medical verification takes 6 hours. A team of 3 healers, including Rachel, who's now officially implicated in Carlos's freedom, examines every aspect of his identity. Blood samples, bone structure analysis, historical knowledge testing,
Magical signature vérification.
Every test confirms the same thing. The man freed from the North Tower is unquestionably Carlos Gould, Alpha King of the Silvermont Pack, who disappeared 25 years ago. The results are presented to the Pack Council in a formal session. Elder Timothy reads them aloud, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he's confirming. The medical evidence is conclusive. This is Carlos Gould, which means Vincent Kane's claim that our Alpha King died 25 years ago was false. The question now is whether that falsehood constitutes actionable betrayal. It was necessary deception, Vincent argues. He's recovered his composure, built a new defensive strategy around the verified facts. Carlos Gould was unstable. His policies endangered the pack. I made the difficult decision to remove him from power for the greater good. By poisoning and imprisoning him, Elder Timothy says. Without trial, without pack consent, without any oversight. Sometimes leadership requires unilateral action, Vincent says. The council debates for hours. Lula watches from the gallery, invisible as always despite being at the center of the crisis. She sees the pack fracturing in real time, some wolves defending Vincent's quarter-century of leadership, others horrified by the confirmed betrayal, most simply confused and looking for someone to tell them what to believe. The formal combat challenge is confirmed for 3 days hence. Carlos will face Vincent in traditional alpha combat, fight to submission or death, with the pack as witnesses. You can't win this, Lula tells Carlos that evening. They're in guest chambers the council assigned him, better than the tower, still guarded, essentially house arrest until the combat resolves everything. Probably not, Carlos admits. He's eating his first real meal in 25 years, and even that small act clearly exhausts him. Vincent's right that I can barely stand. 3 days isn't enough to recover from this level of damage. Then withdraw the challenge, Lula says. Find another way. There is no other way, Carlos interrupts gently. The pack needs to see this resolved through their traditional methods. If I refuse combat, I look weak, cowardly. That destroys any credibility I've built. I have to fight, even if I lose. That's suicide. Maybe, Carlos says. Or maybe Vincent will underestimate how much damage I can do before I fall. Either way, Lula, this was always going to end in violence. I knew that the moment I called the pack. The only question was whether it would be structured violence with rules or chaos. Lula wants to argue. Wants to find the angle that doesn't end with Carlos dying 3 days after she freed him. But looking at his expression, calm, resolved, almost peaceful, she understands that he made this calculation years ago. 25 years in a tomb teaches you to think long-term. To accept that some battles are worth fighting even when you know you'll lose. I'm sorry, Lula says quietly. I freed you just so you could die in combat. You freed me so I could die with dignity instead of rotting in that tower, Carlos corrects. That's not nothing, Lula. That's everything. Rachel visits later that night with medical supplies. I can help, she says. Nutritional support, muscle stimulants, compounds that accelerate healing. It won't make you whole, but it might give you a fighting chance. Vincent will claim chemical enhancement is cheating, Carlos points out. Vincent can claim whatever he wants, Rachel says. You've been starved and weakened for 25 years. Using medical intervention to partially reverse that damage isn't cheating, it's basic fairness. She administers a cocktail of supplements and begins a physical therapy regimen designed to restore as much strength as possible in 3 days. It's brutal work. Carlos's body fights every movement, muscles that haven't been properly used in decades screaming protest at the sudden demand. But he endures it, because he's spent 25 years enduring worse. Lula helps however she can, bringing food, assisting with exercises, sitting with Carlos during the brief periods when Rachel forces him to rest. Why are you still here? Carlos asks on the second night. You freed me. That's done. Staying close to me now just puts you in danger when Vincent inevitably targets anyone who helped me. I'm not leaving, Lula says. You're here because I freed you. That makes what happens next my responsibility. That's not how responsibility works. It's how I'm defining it, Lula says. Besides, where else would I go? My Omega quarters? My cleaning duties? Vincent's already destroyed my comfortable invisibility. I can't go back to being ignored after this. Carlos looks at her with an expression that's becoming familiar, something between admiration and concern. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe, Lula says. But at least I'll die having actually done something that mattered instead of spending my life scrubbing floors for wolves who never saw me. I see you, Carlos says quietly. I know, Lula says. That's why I'm staying. The third day arrives too quickly. The combat arena is an ancient stone circle at the center of the pack's territory, the traditional space for settling disputes that require violence to resolve. The entire pack assembles around it, hundreds of wolves in a circular formation that allows everyone to witness. Lula stands with Rachel in the Omega section, the lowest-ranking wolves positioned farthest from the circle's center. From here, Carlos and Vincent are distant figures, but Lula can still see the disparity. Vincent is massive, powerful, moving with the confidence of someone who's trained continuously for 25 years. Carlos is gaunt, damaged, barely keeping himself upright through sheer will and Rachel's medical intervention. It looks like exactly what it is, a strong, healthy alpha about to destroy a weakened opponent. Elder Timothy officiates, his voice carrying across the assembled pack. This combat will determine leadership of the Silvermont pack. Carlos Gould challenges Vincent Kane. Fight to submission or death. The pack witnesses. Begin. Vincent doesn't waste time. He shifts immediately, full wolf form, massive and dark, moving with lethal speed. Carlos shifts too, but his wolf form is diminished. Smaller than it should be. Slower. The physical manifestation of 25 years of damage. Vincent lunges. And Carlos impossibly dodges. So Carlos, who's been chained in a tower being slowly poisoned by silver for 25 years and can barely walk without help, just challenged Vincent to traditional alpha combat in front of the entire pack. Vincent is in peak physical condition, has trained continuously, has every possible advantage. Carlos can barely stand upright and is surviving in spite medical supplements and Rachel's probably illegal muscle stimulants. This should be a massacre. Vincent should win in approximately 30 seconds. And yet somehow, when Vincent lunges, Carlos dodges. Either Rachel's medical intervention is doing work, or Carlos has been planning this specific fight for 25 years and has strategies Vincent can't even imagine, or we're about to witness the most spectacular underdog combat in League history. Meanwhile, Lula is watching from the Omega section like, I freed him 3 days ago, and now he's about to get murdered in front of everyone. Oh gods, what have I done? And Rachel is probably calculating which medical supplies she'll need for the aftermath. If you want to know whether Carlos actually has a chance, what strategy could possibly overcome 25 years of physical damage, whether Vincent has secrets of his own, and what massive twist is about to flip this entire combat, subscribe now because we are heading into the climax and nothing is going according to anyone's plan. Carlos doesn't try to match Vincent's strength. He can't, his body simply won't allow it. Instead, he uses what 25 years in that tower taught him: patience, observation, and the ability to survive when survival seems impossible. He dodges, deflects, lets Vincent's attacks slide past rather than blocking them directly. It's defensive fighting pushed to its absolute limit, not trying to win, just trying not to lose too quickly. The crowd watches in confused silence. This isn't the dominant, powerful combat they expected. It's something stranger, more desperate. Vincent realizes Carlos's strategy and adjusts. Instead of overwhelming force, he starts targeting specific weaknesses. Carlos's damaged left leg, the way his right shoulder doesn't rotate fully, the slight hesitation before certain movements. It's effective. Carlos takes hits he can't fully avoid. Blood stains his fur. His movements slow incrementally. But he doesn't fall. Stay down, Vincent snarls, his wolf form towering over Carlos after a particularly brutal strike. Accept that you've lost. Carlos pushes himself up on shaking legs. Blood drips from multiple wounds. His breathing is labored. But his eyes are burning. I spent 25 years learning how to survive, Carlos says, his voice rough but carrying across the arena. You think 3 minutes of combat will break me? He lunges, not at Vincent directly, but at an angle Vincent doesn't expect. His teeth find Vincent's shoulder, tearing through muscle with desperate force. Vincent howls and throws Carlos off. The impact should shatter bones. But Carlos rolls, absorbs the force, comes up in a defensive crouch despite the pain screaming through his damaged body. "You can't win this," Vincent says. "You're dying on your feet." "Probably," Carlos agrees. "But I can make you pay for every second of those 25 years before I fall." They clash again. And again. Carlos fights with a fury born from decades of helpless captivity. Vincent fighting with the desperation of someone who suddenly realizes his certain victory isn't so certain. Because Carlos isn't trying to win through strength. He's trying to last long enough that the pack sees something important. Vincent is struggling against an opponent who should have been dead years ago. If Carlos was really the dangerous, unstable alpha Vincent claimed, if the imprisonment was really justified, why would a barely standing wolf pose any threat at all? The dissonance plants doubt. Lula can see it spreading through the crowd, wolves questioning the narrative they've accepted for 25 years. But doubt isn't enough to stop the fight. Vincent makes a calculated decision. He stops trying for clean strikes and goes for brutal, overwhelming force. Tackles Carlos, pins him, positions for a killing bite. "It's over," Vincent says. Carlos laughs, a sound that's half cough, half genuine amusement. "Is it?" And then he does something no one expects.
He speaks.
Not to Vincent.
To the pack.
25 years ago, Vincent Kane told you I died defending this territory.
He lied.
He poisoned me, imprisoned me, and ruled in my place. But he made one critical mistake. Vincent's jaws are at Carlos's throat. One movement, and this ends. "He kept me alive," Carlos continues, his voice carrying despite the disadvantage. "Because killing me outright risked someone discovering the body. Keeping me sealed meant the lie could persist indefinitely. But it also meant I was here. Waiting. Learning. Planning." "Shut up," Vincent growls. "The journal Lula found wasn't the only evidence," Carlos says. 25 years is a long time. Long enough to mark every conversation I could hear from that tower. Every council meeting. Every private discussion Vincent had with his conspirators. "I know where the bodies are buried, Vincent. Literally and figuratively." Vincent's grip tightens. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Carlos meets his eyes. "Test me. Kill me here. And I guarantee my evidence gets released. Letters I wrote, cached in locations you'll never find. Testimony from wolves you thought were loyal. Documentation of every corrupt decision you've made for 25 years. "He's lying," Vincent says to the crowd. "A desperate ploy from a dying wolf." "Then call my bluff," Carlos challenges. "Kill me. Risk that I'm telling the truth. Risk that your entire regime collapses when my evidence proves decades of systematic corruption." Vincent hesitates. It's that hesitation, that fraction of a second of uncertainty, that proves Carlos isn't bluffing. The crowd sees it. That moment where Vincent's absolute confidence cracks. "I submit," Carlos says clearly. Traditional submission. Vincent Kane has proven physical dominance. He wins the combat. It shocks everyone. Carlos is conceding, accepting defeat. But his voice carries a different message. Vincent wins the fight. But I've already won what matters. The pack now knows I'm alive.
Knows the story of my death was a lie.
Knows Vincent hesitated when I mentioned evidence of his corruption. Doubt, once planted, doesn't disappear. Vincent releases him, stepping back.
He's won.
Technically, legally, he's won. But looking at the crowd, at the confused, questioning faces of wolves who've spent 25 years believing a comfortable lie, he understands that his victory is hollow. The combat is concluded, Elder Timothy announces. Vincent Kane retains alpha position, but his tone suggests the conclusion settles nothing. Carlos spends 2 days recovering in the medical wing under Rachel's care. The combat damaged him further. Cracked ribs, torn muscles, internal bleeding that nearly killed him despite his surrender. But he's alive. And Vincent, despite winning the combat, hasn't executed him. "Why is he keeping you alive?" Lula asks during one of her visits. "Because he doesn't know if I was bluffing about the evidence," Carlos says. Killing me now risks triggering whatever contingency plan I might have put in place.
So he's paralyzed.
Waiting to see if I make a move. Were you bluffing? Rachel asks. Carlos smiles, an expression that's almost mischievous.
Partially.
I do have information. 25 years of hearing council meetings from that tower gave me extensive knowledge about Vincent's operations. But cash letters? Hidden testimony? That was improvisation. So you have evidence, but not the dramatic insurance policy you claimed, Lula says. Exactly. Which means I need to actually create that insurance policy before Vincent figures out I was improvising.
How?
Rachel asks. By documenting everything I know and distributing it widely enough that Vincent can't suppress it all, Carlos says. I'll need help. People I can trust to hold pieces of the testimony. He looks at Lula. People Vincent underestimates. Over the following week, Carlos, Lula, and Rachel work secretly to build the evidence cache Carlos claimed existed. He dictates testimony, names, dates, specific instances of corruption he witnessed or heard about during his imprisonment. Rachel verifies what can be verified through medical records and PAC documentation. Lula distributes copies to Omegas throughout the PAC. Wolves Vincent would never suspect of holding dangerous information. It's painstaking work. Dangerous work. If Vincent discovers what they're doing, he'll have justification to execute all of them. But slowly, the evidence accumulates. Financial records showing Vincent redirecting PAC resources to personal projects. Testimony about how he eliminated political rivals through carefully orchestrated accidents. Documentation of how the prohibition on the North Tower was enforced through intimidation and threats. And at the center of it all, Carlos's own testimony about the betrayal, the poisoning, the 25 years of imprisonment. This could actually work, Rachel says, reviewing the compiled documentation. If we release this publicly, Vincent's position becomes untenable. It also starts a civil war, Carlos points out. Half the PAC is invested in Vincent's regime. They won't accept this evidence without fighting to suppress it. Then what's the alternative?
Lula's.
Let Vincent keep ruling because opposing him is too dangerous? No, Carlos says. We release the evidence. We force the confrontation. But we do it strategically. At a moment when Vincent can't suppress it, can't control the narrative, can't isolate and eliminate everyone who knows the truth. When? Rachel asks. The Harvest Festival, Carlos says. 2 weeks from now. The entire PAC assembles. Multiple allied PACs send representatives. Everything is documented and witnessed by outsiders. If we release the evidence then, Vincent can't bury it without exposing himself to the Continental Alliance. It's a solid plan. Risky but solid. They spend the next 2 weeks preparing. Copying documents. Coordinating with the Omegas who will help distribute evidence. Building contingencies in case Vincent discovers the plan early. And then, 3 days before the festival, something unexpected happens. Vincent requests a private meeting with Carlos. The meeting takes place in neutral space, a council chamber with witnesses positioned outside, close enough to intervene if violence erupts, but far enough to allow private conversation. Vincent looks tired. Not physically, he's still powerful, still commanding. But there's something worn in his expression that wasn't there before. You were right, Vincent says without preamble. The PAC is questioning. The combat proved nothing except that you're more resilient than anyone expected. And the doubt is spreading. Yes, Carlos agrees. It is. So here's my offer, Vincent continues. Withdraw your challenge. Publicly accept my leadership. And I'll commute your imprisonment. You can live freely within the PAC. No authority, no political role, but not sealed in that tower either. That's generous, Carlos says. For a usurper. I'm trying to prevent civil war, Vincent says. If you release whatever evidence you've compiled, the PAC will fracture.
Volves will die.
Everything I've built will collapse into violence. Is that what you want? What I want, Carlos says slowly, is the truth. The pack deserves to know what actually happened 25 years ago. The pack deserves stability, Vincent counters. They've had 25 years of peace and prosperity under my leadership. Yes, I betrayed you to achieve it. Yes, I lied about your death. But the results speak for themselves. The Silvermont pack is stronger now than it was under your rule. Strength built on lies isn't real strength, Carlos says. It's the only kind of strength that matters, Vincent argues. Noble ideals don't protect territory. They don't feed pack members. They don't prevent stronger packs from invading. I did what was necessary. Carlos studies him. You actually believe that. You've convinced yourself that the betrayal was justified. Because it was, Vincent says. You would have led this pack to ruin with your pacifism. I saved us. By poisoning me and burying me alive. By making a hard choice you were too weak to make, Vincent says. And I'd do it again. The admission hangs between them. Then we can't coexist, Carlos says. Because I won't accept leadership built on betrayal. And you won't surrender power you believe you earned through necessary pragmatism. So it's war, Vincent says. It was always going to be war, Carlos confirms. The only question was timing. Vincent stands. Then you force my hand. If you release that evidence, I'll have you and everyone who helped you arrested for treason. I'll use every legal and illegal tool at my disposal to suppress the truth. And I'll win, Carlos. Because I'm stronger, I'm better positioned, and I'm willing to do things you're not. Maybe, Carlos says. Or maybe you've misunderstood what strength actually means. The Harvest Festival begins 2 days later. The entire pack assembles. Representatives from 6 allied packs attend. Everything is documented, witnessed, recorded for historical purposes. At noon, during the formal Alpha address to the assembled packs, Lula and a coordinated group of Omegas begin distributing documents throughout the crowd. The evidence. Everything Carlos documented. 25 years of corruption, betrayal, and lies compiled into irrefutable testimony. Vincent sees it happening and immediately calls for guards to suppress the distribution. But there are too many Omegas, too many copies, too many witnesses from other packs who are already reading the documents. The truth spreads like wildfire. Within an hour, the entire festival knows. The Silvermont pack's Alpha is a usurper. Their beloved king didn't die 25 years ago. He was imprisoned by his own beta. Vincent tries to control the narrative. Calls the evidence fabricated. Claims Carlos is manipulating Omegas who don't understand politics. But Elder Timothy stands. I remember Carlos Gould's rule. I remember questioning the story of his death at the time. I remember Vincent's explanation never quite adding up. This evidence answers questions I've had for 25 years. Other wolves speak up, testifying about their own doubts, about incidents that make sense now in light of the evidence, about the prohibition on the North Tower that always seemed excessive. The pack fractures in real time. Some are still loyal to Vincent, others rallying to Carlos. Most simply confused, trying to process 25 years of lies being exposed in a single afternoon. The representatives from allied packs call for a formal Continental Alliance review, an investigation of Vincent's claims to authority, with potential sanctions if the betrayal is confirmed. Vincent knows he's lost. Not militarily, he still commands loyal forces. But politically, legally, the foundation of his rule has been destroyed. He could fight. Could order his guards to arrest Carlos, suppress the evidence, eliminate witnesses. But looking at the assembled packs, at the hundreds of wolves who now know the truth, at the Continental Alliance representatives who are already documenting everything, Vincent understands that fighting would only confirm his guilt. I submit to Continental Alliance review, Vincent says, his voice carrying forced calm. If this evidence is authentic, I'll accept appropriate consequences. It's not surrender. It's a calculated retreat, accepting temporary loss to minimize long-term damage. But for Carlos, for Lula, for everyone who spent weeks building this moment, it's enough. The pack didn't descend into civil war. The truth was revealed without mass violence. And Vincent's quarter-century of unchallenged rule is over.
The end.
Let me tell you what actually happened in this story, because underneath the Forbidden Tower and the dramatic combat, there's something that matters more than any of it. An Omega who had every reason to walk away, who had been taught her entire life that her rank meant she didn't matter, heard a voice calling from a forbidden tower and chose to investigate. That choice, that single moment of deciding to care when she had no obligation to, changed everything. Carlos Gould spent 25 years buried alive, calling for help that never came. Until Lula. Until a washwoman with a mop and access to archives no one monitored because Omegas are invisible. She found the key. She opened the tomb. She freed a king. And then she did something even more important. She helped him build the evidence that exposed 25 years of lies. She coordinated with other Omegas to distribute that evidence when Vincent would have suppressed it, and she proved that the invisible wolves the pack underestimated were the most dangerous ones in the territory. Vincent lost not because Carlos was stronger. He lost because Lula was braver. The combat? That was theater. The real war was fought in archives and secret meetings and careful documentation. The real victory was achieved by wolves Vincent never bothered to monitor because he decided they didn't matter. And that's what makes this story actually powerful. Not the romance between the buried king and the Omega who freed him, though yes, that's developing in ways we didn't have space to fully explore. Not the dramatic combat or the festival revelation or the political intrigue. But the fundamental truth is that people who are systematically underestimated, who are taught they're worthless, who are made invisible by design, are often the ones who change everything when they decide to act. Here's my question for you. Was Lula right to free Carlos? Or should she have reported the voice to proper authorities and let them investigate? Because think about it. Lula broke fundamental pack law. She entered a forbidden space. She freed a prisoner. She did all of this based on her own judgment with no authority backing her decision. She got lucky that Carlos was actually the rightful king. But what if he'd been dangerous? What if the prohibition existed for legitimate reasons she didn't understand? When is breaking rules justified? And who gets to make that call? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And the second question. The story ends with Vincent submitting to review, not defeated. Is that satisfying? Or does justice require more definitive punishment? Because Vincent gets to argue his case before the Continental Alliance. He might face consequences. He might not. The ending is ambiguous intentionally, more realistic than dramatic. Is that the right choice for the story? Or do you need to see Vincent definitively punished to feel satisfied? Be honest. I want to know what you think. If you enjoyed the story about forbidden boundaries deliberately crossed, buried kings waiting 25 years for rescue, Omegas proving the hierarchy wrong, truth revealed through coordination among the invisible, justice coming through evidence rather than violence. Subscribe for more stories where the lowest-ranked wolves change everything. Comfortable lies get shattered by uncomfortable truths. Forbidden spaces contain answers no one wanted found. Patience and planning defeat immediate power. The people who free prisoners become more dangerous than the prisoners themselves. Hit subscribe if you believe in hearing voices no one else bothers to listen to, in opening doors everyone says should stay closed, and in the revolutionary power of one person deciding that injustice isn't acceptable just because it's convenient. Because the next story is forming, and I promise, it's going to make you question every rule you've been taught to follow without asking why.